And so when we talk about Black church, you just can't get away from the fact that God was with us even before we came over here, right?
Like, I just think it's important that we should understand that the beginnings of the Black church stand in resistance to the empire.
Yeah. And you can't talk about the civil rights movement and who actually made the civil rights movement move and do all that it does, who actually makes churches move and do all that it does, without talking about the presence of Black women.
Part of what made the Black church, and I'm extending that to say Black community, so powerful during the civil rights movement, was because it was the fabric and established network. We were organized even before we tried to organize. Mm-hmm. So it was easy to leverage that level of organization to accomplish things that we did.
All right, I am the moderator. And my name is Mattie Phillips. I have been a Columbus resident forever. I'm currently a third-year PhD student, actually a doctoral candidate now because I've passed all my exams, looking at my research project is about the unheard voices, people that live in federally subsidized multifamily low-income rental housing. These are neighborhoods that they consider the neighborhoods of the last resort. And so my research entails me working with them to create a voice for them, to talk to people that are policymakers and are the managers of these particular housing sites. And so in collecting these narratives, I want to give voice to people that live in project-based housing. That's in just some of the communities, the places that they reside in. But anyway, I always like to say I like to give voice to the least, the last, and the lost, the left out.
Well, good evening to everybody. Let me first say, before I make any introduction, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conversation on tonight, to our moderator, to Pastor Holmes, Reverend Turner as well, to all of you, my friends in this community. Again, I'm Kevin Dudley. I pastor Shiloh Baptist Church around the corner here. And I also teach over at Trinity Lutheran Seminary at Capital University. Actually, after this year, I'm the only African-American male teaching there. We're going to invite another African-American sister who will teach there next year. But after this year, I'll be the longest serving professor over there, and I teach.
Wow.
Teach in the area of church and culture. So a lot of what I do revolves around theology and how the church and people of faith intersect and interact with the broader community. So,
good evening, everybody. I'm the senior servant of the historic Union Grove Baptist Church, where since 1888, our church has stood as a beacon and really a signifier of the marriage of Jesus and justice, long-standing civil rights history, social justice, civic engagement history. I make no apologies about it. I say it on a regular basis. I am a native New Yorker, born and raised in the Bronx. And the reason why I always start introductions that way and why I make mention of it is because those beginnings, kind of that type of socializing, very much informed the way I thought about the world, the way I saw the church. For those who know the church in a certain perspective, Abyssinian was around the corner from my church, and Riverside was up the way from our church. And so there was James Forbes over here and Calvin Butts over here. And these, for those who know Black preaching across the span of history, these mighty men of God, these mighty preachers who understood not only the spiritual, but the social, and at a very impressionable age while living in the crack epidemic and Reaganomics and all these other things that were happening, that was very much informative to me. So I always try to lead with the fact that there's a certain way that I was raised that helps my worldview and certainly pours into my own theology. Graduate of Wright State University with a degree in English education with a minor in African American studies. I am almost done with this MDiv at Phillips. I need to have some conversation about this doctorate work. Amen. At my heart, I'm an activist. I've spent years and years as a community organizer, as a political organizer, worked from everywhere from bread to the Ohio Organizing Collaborative. Spent a large portion of my career organizing churches around social justice ministry and understanding the intersection between the two. And thank you all so much for being here. And for those who are watching online too, thank you for being here.
Thank you. My name is Jamar Turner. I am a multidisciplinary artist. At this time, I am saying that I am a minister of words and pictures as words, and words as pictures. I'm a spoken word artist, ordained minister, I'm a former pastor, and I am also a doctoral candidate. I have been student of Dr. Dudley. I've been student of Dr. Dudley on at least 2 institutions, so it's good, always good to see him. My doctoral work is around critical artist intervention for the care of souls, marrying my identity as a public artist and public theologian with my vocation as a hospital chaplain at the James Cancer Hospital.
So we are here this evening for a purpose. Part of it is to have a discussion to celebrate the history of the Black church, for starters, and also to develop a better understanding of the evolving role of the Black church. And hopefully we can come up with some actionable ideas to help shape the future direction of the Black church, and also for a deeper engagement to inspire. It's funny because today I started reading headlines, and it just so happens that these are some of the headlines. Pastor who swindled church takes case to Ohio Supreme Court over his sentence. Faith Life Church critics face protection order requests, legal threats to stay quiet. $1 million sexual assault lawsuit filed against Arlington Church and pastor. Church departures, hurt, abuse, and geography among reasons. Mississippi pastor and deacon charged with embezzling church funds. Bloody Sunday 60th anniversary marked in Selma with remembrances as well as concerns. Pastor Khan, longtime friends, nonprofit out of more than $230,000. This is just today's headline. That's just only some of them that I'm reading to you about the church. But be that as it may, historically, the Black church has been the center of the Black community. Its building has been, as we saw in the video, its building has been the community's primary meeting place. Its congregations have been the primary political base. Its resources have been the community's most reliable financial aid and material base. In the book of Exodus, God is telling Moses to collect from the people, basically to pay tithes. And the people gave so much that Moses told them to stop giving. Y'all are like, it's 2025. So, and also, its spiritual power has been the community's most vital and potent force for personal education as well as communal liberation. So the first question to our panel is, how did the Black church emerge as a distinct institution in America? And for those of you in the audience, the questions are on the screens. So how did the Black church emerge as and the panel members also have the questions. So how did the Black church emerge as a distinct institution in America? And what were some of the key historical events that shaped its development?
Professor Dudley.
Well, and let me qualify my response. I'm not a historian, but I do teach often in this area of the Black church tradition. Often overlooked, and I'll lift this up at the very start, is that what we know as Black church began before slavery. It began before persons were brought to these shores. There has always been spirituality within Black peoples around the world. And so when we talk about Black church, you just can't get away from the fact that God was with us even before we came over here, right? So I need to make that clear. But we also understand something that I think is distinctive and probably the most unique feature of what we understand as the Black church is that the Black church was born out of struggle. And unlike many other traditions, many other historic pathways, we as Black people, from our very genesis as a Black church, started at a place where we were wrestling with identity and placement and even a sense of legacy and from whence we have come. All of that goes into the formation of the Black church when we get to the period of slavery and, leading forward to emancipation, Reconstruction, and the various stages of development of Black church. But, I'll just leave you with this. If nothing else, remember, God has always been present. There has always been a spirituality within Black people, which is the very core of what we understand as Black church.
Amen.
Yeah. In concert with that, I think it's important for us as we're in conversation to own that as our ancestors are brought here and the beginnings of what we know of as the Black church, Black church, is that we should also understand the Black church as counter-imperial, right? That I just think on a base level, we should understand that the beginnings of the Black church were not in concert and cooperation with the apparatus in place, with the empire in place. It's always left of center. The Black church has always been, and is now in many ways, a left of center project. And the reason why I think it's so important to understand the church in that way is then by default, when the church is in cooperation with the empire, we should understand that as antithetical to Black church ethic. Does that make sense? Like, I just think it's important that we should understand that the beginnings of the Black church stand in resistance to the empire. And that's not anti-American. We could have a larger conversation about how revolt is acceptable when certain people do it and controversial when other people do it. But I just wanted to add to what you were saying, that I think it's important for this conversation that when we're talking about the Black church, that it's also counter-imperial.
Yes.
Pastor Dudley has excellently explained how it originated in Africa and the spirituality of our ancestors, which is why it shows up and manifests in the way it does even the Americas. Pastor Holmes has talked very eloquently about, without labeling, what we call the invisible institution, which is, there is the what we call brush harbor religion. It's the slave master's church, and then the slaves go into the field and they go into the woods at night, and then they have Black church. This is before there were Black church buildings. And I think the question asked about the prominence of the Black church, which I don't think you can talk about the prominence of the Black church without talking about the civil rights movement and the rise of Dr. King and that whole movement. I think that's when, as Dr. King's trying to dramatize injustice, he's also putting Black church on TV too. So I think that's when the prominence, what we call the prominence of the Black church, at least for me, kind of stands out the most.
Yeah, and you can hold on to the microphone for a minute, because that was the next question about the role of the church in the civil rights movement. We see bits and pieces of it, and usually Dr. King is very prominent when it comes to the civil rights movement, but there were so many other people involved whose names we don't know, whose names we wouldn't recognize if we saw them on a register somewhere. So what about those other individuals?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. theoretically, I'm a womanist scholar, which means that, a part of my
Right.
framework comes from Black women's spirituality.
Yeah.
And you can't talk about the civil rights movement and who actually made the civil rights movement move and do
Work.
all that it does, who actually makes churches move and do all that it does without talking about the presence of Black women. Now, historically, unfortunately, that in a lot of cases, Black women have been relegated to that position and kind of frozen in that space and not allowed to ascend to a leadership, which is a conversation for later in this conversation.
I'm sorry, I started laughing because for two reasons. One, I have the privilege of serving here at Union Grove. Say amen if you know that all this month we're talking about women in a particular way, and we just had Bible study this past Wednesday around womanist theology. So this is how that shows up in the social sphere. If your theology just stays inside of your church, that's dangerous. And so it's important just so thank you, because you're making me look good.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't have to do that because you're so cutting edge.
So I appreciate that. And I appreciate you highlighting also that there are names that go unsaid that matter. And there are reasons for it that we maybe don't have the time to unpack. There are other isms that lend into those names not being stated. The Diane Nashes, right? Where they're just people who we don't say. And I love that you lifted also that there's a certain cap that we've placed on how that looks. It's one of the other things that we've been talking about at our church. Just what does it mean for that to be more equitable? And if it's liberation as a theological practice, but then oppression as the norms of the institution, then there's something wrong. And unless we can have those conversations and how that plays out while also holding up the prominence of the Black church, right? And what the Black church has meant to a movement. If we can't have those conversations in concert with each other, I actually think we do something problematic. It's Baldwin who talks about, I love America more than any other country in the world. I reserve the right to criticize her perpetually, right? There's this notion that me offering a critique is not because I don't love it. I love it so much that I have to be honest about it. Last thing, and I'll yield to Dr. Dudley. I push back a little bit around the prominence of the Black church in terms of maybe the civil rights movement. I think it's valuable to hold to that. I think that on its face, you can make that argument fairly strong. I would wrestle with, and I heard another professor say this, and I can't remember her name. It was right around the time where Dr. Glaude wrote the article about the Black church being dead. And the article was talking about not dead in terms of presence, but dead in terms of relevance, dead in terms of function. And the argument that it was Ebony Marshall Turman. And she said, how can the thing be dead if it never really lived? And the argument it was making was that because there was only a segment of churches that were involved in the movement, right? We hold up names like King, like Abernathy, but the truth is they couldn't go other places and preach. Right? Even in the city that we live in, right? The truth is only a handful of places where those persons could come and preach. Dr. King couldn't even be on the board of trustees at the institution that he came out of, and he's the most distinguished alum ever, right? So there was an unpopularity that happened as a result of that. And I'm not negating what you're saying. I just think that it's important that we hold space for maybe, if we talk about the thing living at its peak, I'm not sure. We can assign it for the purpose of this conversation, but I think it's important to maybe tease that out a little bit.
So then why do we get eye rolls when we talk about women preachers, women pastors, women evangelists? Why do we get these eye rolls? And it seems like there's a lack of relevance towards women involved in various ministries, especially when it comes to high profile.
I just wanted to say.
Go ahead.
Wait, hold on. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say, like when I mentioned the prominence of the Black church, I think this is the moment of the Black church that we romanticize the most.
I agree.
So that's
with that.
when I say that this is the, and I think this is. I think its skeletons still live with us today, and I think that's actually a different issue. But it's something we could talk about later in the conversation.
I agree with that.
A whole nother talk, huh?
And I think well said, both of you. And I think it's important for us to be clear. In case y'all didn't know, we are human beings.
Amen.
We're flawed. We've never been perfect. And to that end, even when we talk about Black church, Black community, there's never been a time where we've all been on the same page.
Right.
Absolutely.
You know, there's always been fragmentation, division, and various things that
Right.
has splintered us. I want to add a piece too that as much as the Black church was a part of the civil rights movement, so was the Nation of Islam, so were those who would be humanists and secularists and persons of non-faith. But the difference is that during the period of the civil rights movement and struggle, we had a very intensified common struggle, which bound us together even if we didn't agree on all points. So you're absolutely right. Dr. King was welcome in only a segment of the Black community across the country. Malcolm X, I mean, you go down the list of all of these figures and names, and it wasn't that they all agreed in principle of what to do and how to do it. The difference is we agreed what we were up against, and that's what brought us together. And I'll leave this last piece. Part of what made the Black church, and I'm extending that to say Black community, so powerful during the civil rights movement, was because it was the fabric and established network. We were organized even before we tried to organize. So it was easy to leverage that level of organization to accomplish things that we did, both in terms of legislation, but also in terms of economics and real living in our cities. We already had the fabric of community, which allowed us to leverage that against the common problem that we had.
Yeah.
Black churches have majored in their abilities to provide charity, but not all Black churches have been able to provide justice for the community. And I think those are two separate things that we need to think about. Like, justice is the balancing of imbalances. You need the analogy of the babies are in the water. Well, charity is to pull the babies out the water. Justice is to go up to the mountain and tell the person throwing them in the water, stop throwing them in the water.
So what happens when churches lift up Jesus but don't act like Jesus? And don't sound like Jesus? And don't resist like Jesus?
There is a group that meets every Tuesday night here in the King Lincoln Bronzeville area. They will never set foot in a church on Sunday morning, but every Tuesday night they gather, they pray, they study the word, they talk about real life, and I would argue that that's Black church.
Yeah.
Just not in the institutional sense.
Yeah.